Welcome to Netra's News. This is Netra Halperin. This evening we're going to be talking about Monsanto, GMOs, which is genetically modified organisms, and some responses to that. And so tonight we have in the studio here Yo Kobayashi. I'm very excited. He is formerly an institutional investor. So if you could please tell us, what is an institutional investor?
Sure. Basically, we worked at a fund, collected money from people like retirement funds, and we invested on behalf of those clients into large multinational corporations. And I got an opportunity to speak with hundreds of executives. Many were CEOs of some of the largest corporations in the world. So that's basically what I did.
It's interesting because the last show was called From Speculation to Occupation, and it was about the bank bailouts, the mortgage foreclosure crisis. So it sounds like you could have been on that show also. So it's a very diverse skill set. It's affecting a lot of things in our world these days.
Absolutely.
And we also are pleased to have back here Dr. Lorrin Pang, who is Maui Public Health Officer. And please tell us your connection to this topic.
Okay, I will speak as a private citizen. About 20 years ago, before I came to Maui, I've been in Maui 10 years, we were studying genetics. We were looking at resistance, drug resistance of microbes. So we know quite a bit. We were medically, I'm a physician, we were watching gene modifications in humans. It's called gene therapy. And we watched them fail. And we watched the moratorium on them. We watched the toxicity. And then I came to Maui, and I find out that these crops have the same mutations, but there's, to me, a whole lot less precaution, and nobody seems to be, well, the public seems to be concerned, but the corporations don't seem to be concerned, and neither do the regulators. So having seen what we saw on the medical side, I'm a little bit appalled that the plant guys do something different. Plants is plants until you eat them. Then it comes into our area of health. Right, exactly.
And because I wanted this show to be all-inclusive with both sides of the story, I did invite Monsanto. They discussed it with me. I postponed this show for a month. At first they said they were going to participate, and then about a week ago they backed out. And so what I have done is Akaku was generous enough to give to me some footage of an interview with Mr. Paul Kohler, I think it's Kohler, who is the, what is he?
He's a scientist in public relations.
Scientist in public relations.
For Monsanto.
For Monsanto, right. So what I did is I took his comments and I split them up into topic areas. And so I'm going to show his comments and then these gentlemen's comments and back and forth. So it's kind of a way to make it a debate, because my goal is for citizens to have both sides. You know, I could just say one side or just the other side, but I think people want to be able to compare apples to apples and see both sides at the same moment on each issue.
So, some of the things that I've often heard about food and food of biotech origin, or GMO, is they're concerned about safety, certainly one. The other is about choice or freedom to choose. And the last one is sort of about adoption of those crops around the world. So if you want me to, I can touch on each three of those, or...
Oh, no, please, go on. Yeah.
Okay. Well, from a food safety standpoint, certainly since 1996, biotechnology has been a part of mainstream agriculture in the United States. Today, 90% of the corn, 90% of the soybeans, and I think close to 90% of the cotton as well, is biotech of one type or another. So for 15 plus years, we've had these crops being planted in the U.S. and other places around the world. Also today, around the world, there are close to 29 countries that are also planting biotech crops. And on top of those 29, there's another 30 that are importing those crops into their food system. So there's a total of about 60 countries around the world that are planting biotech or importing biotech into their food supply. So from a safety standpoint, 15 years of safety is a pretty strong statement around safety. And it isn't just a Monsanto safety issuance, it's organizations like the World Health Organization, the American Medical Association, the National Academies of Sciences, that also attest to the safety. I mean, it's as safe as the conventional foods that we're currently consuming. Yeah.
What is your gentleman's responses to that?
Okay, I've been asked to comment on this. First of all, I taught clinical research for the World Health Organization for 20 years, starting in 1985. First of all, these comments are very misleading. 15 years of safety, quote unquote safety, doesn't mean a lot to me, especially if nothing has been done in those 15 years. Number one, the principle is, how did you start? 15 years ago, you mean you started without safety tests, you bring it on to us for 15 years, hope that nothing happens. Even if it was safe for 15 years, how you started is unethical. You're supposed to do the test first. Now that 15 years has gone by, have you looked? It's unlabeled. You can't study post-marketing studies when things aren't labeled. What else has happened in 15 years? We see all the animal studies come out now. All the toxicity in animals. Animals is animals and humans are humans. But let me take a different approach. You know, smoking was determined and published to be carcinogenic in the mid-50s. We were smoking for decades, 60 plus years, many millions of cigarettes before they finally said, hey, smoking causes cancer. If this was just before the mid-50s, pretend we're in the late 40s, I could give the same statement he gives. Wow, this thing has been around smoking for 50 plus years. We've smoked so many cigarettes, so many countries smoke, so I guess it's safe. That's a very misleading statement, and 15 years is a short time, okay? So I could give that comment about smoking, lead, asbestos. 15 years means nothing to me if you haven't done anything. The next thing I'd like to point out in health is that Monsanto, you should, I suppose Mr. Kohler is speaking for Monsanto, but the head of Monsanto's medical unit was here in Maui to kind of debate me in front of Maui Medical Society. His name is Goldstein, and his position is, you couldn't test safety of GMOs if you wanted to. Now that's his official position. It happens to be wrong. He says in order to test GMOs safely, you'd have to lock people away for 30 years and feed them nothing but GMOs. That's his position. It happens to be wrong, but that's Monsanto's position. The World Health Organization, which he quotes, saying it's safe. Actually, I have the position here. I'll read it. It's very short. Published in Bangkok Post, October 13, 2004. I've said this many times. At this point, we have no evidence to say that it is dangerous to consume food products that contain GMOs. But at the same time, we also don't know its negative side. So we have to say that we do not know the adverse health effects of GM foods. Do not know is not the same as knowing it's safe. Showing no harm is not the same as I didn't see harm because I didn't look. So I wish people would accurately quote these references. They are powerful institutions. The bottom line is they are opinions of powerful institutions. And the real bottom line is, if you show me the data that trumps people's opinion, there is no data. There is no data on health. 15 years means nothing to me. It means like smoking for 50 years before we saw it cause cancer. And in case you say we're aware of things now, we're attuned to look for side effects, how long after we proved smoking causes cancer in the 50s did we show secondhand smoke causes harm? We were tuned in another 2 decades, okay? So if you don't look, you're not gonna see. If you're not gonna label, we're not gonna look. And that's where we stand now. So in this case, I think you should study real well before you misquote and misinterpret other people's comments, including your own. Monsanto's position officially is safety cannot be shown. That happens to be a wrong statement, but that's their position, because you'd have to lock somebody away for 30 years and feed them nothing but GMOs. That's a wrong position, but that's your position. So stick with it and defend it.
And another thing that I would like to say is that there's a lot more cancers. People are getting a lot more cancer now. I mean, you could say, well, it's pesticides, it's herbicides, it's GMO. It's probably a combination of the above. but none of these things are being properly curtailed, and people are getting more and more cancers.
Well, actually, none of these things are properly studied. And so a lot of times you have to say, well, we don't know if it's caused by GMOs. And they will say, well, you haven't proved it's caused by GMOs. I'm sorry, but it's precautionary. If you don't know that GMOs are safe, you should not do this. And furthermore, it's hard to recall because some of these things are life forms that cannot be recalled.
Right.
I think Dr. Pang mentioned that animals are animals and people are people, but animal studies have shown like organ failures, cancer, so on and so
many
forth, right?
things. In fact, it's easy to remember what the animal studies have not yet shown to date.
Right, right. So let's also show the video of Dr. Pang at his house that we took, and it talks about transparency. And so when in the video he says, the World Health Organization says this, and these government agencies are approving this, to me that doesn't necessarily mean that it's correct, because there's a lot of as Occupy Wall Street and many other people are noticing, there's a lot of funny business going on in our government, where the government is not really representing the people, but the campaign contributions of the people that pay them.
The public might have questions.
Yeah.
If you don't allow questions, I don't consider that education.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
And it's giving respect to the audience that they can discern fact from fiction, because that's what we're supposed to do all day long.
I think that's why people are marching, occupying Wall Street.
Exactly.
Education starts with transparency, so we know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
It would make things a lot more fair, and the smarter people, if it's transparent, I can comment on what people are doing or not doing. Otherwise, I'm blind. You don't even know what you're going on, so then I can't have input if I don't know. If the public, there are a lot of smart people there, believe me, educated public. But if we're blind to what's going on, we have no comments. Or comments are
And how would you do about the fact that the media is owned by the 1%? So they're pretty much putting out what they want.
Well, here we got this. We got this alternate media here.
That's what we have.
Why? That's why we, and we're trying to protect this thing. I mean, this whole thing. We have public meetings, but I mean, I speak and I take off time from work. This is Sunday to speak because I speak as a private citizen.
Yeah.
The people with the money speak during their jobs and they're paid for it.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
so it's a little bit unfair, but that's why it's so unfair. People are occupying Wall Street.
Yeah.
I think one of the common principles for Occupy Wall Street, maybe I didn't ask them, but it's for transparency.
I think you are
You
right.
can have conflict of interest. Just be transparent about it so we know how much you have.
Okay.
Well, first, you got to figure out what's true,
Okay.
whether you like it or not.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
Now, if somebody says, well, no, we don't have survival of the fittest, therefore we don't need laws to make everything fair, and actually you do have this survival of the fittest, then they take that to their advantage and take all the money.
Right. And then they want to convert people to their cause through emotion, which is fear and
lost
anger.
Transparency, and a lot of the universities funded by the businesses, like Berkeley, as much as people like to associate now, Berkeley is very different. They're heavily funded by industry.
And so are you saying that what they're saying is not true? Are you saying that it taints the accuracy of the research?
Yes, you can take the money, but I would like it transparent to see how much you're taking.
What I have read is that as far as campaign finance, that as the amount of money that campaigns costs go up, transparency goes up too. But basically, it's not enough. It's like,
That's true.
it's because the average
true.
citizen has to actually work for a living or raise their family, and they don't really have time to be watching every little thing the politicians are doing.
Here's another form of conflict of interest. I mean, the old laws haven't even begun to touch the surface. Go look at how NIH defines it. I mean, they're pretty
NIH
strict.
is?
National Institutes of Health.
Okay.
I mean, powerful group of scientists. First of all, if I give money to you and you declare it, let's say you're running for something. Oh, we declared it. But what about if I said, Netra, I'm not going to give any money to you, then we don't have to declare it. You go, you serve, you do a good job, and if you do a good job, when you quit public office, I got this like
Killer
six-figure,
job,
killer
yeah.
job for you.
Yeah.
Is that conflict of interest or not? Well, you can't take the killer job for X years, what, 1, 2, after leaving office. But man, don't worry, 1 or 2 years, I'll compensate. I'll give you so much salary
Yeah.
that compensates for the 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
Do we have a laws for that? No.
And the only way to deal with that would be that, once you go into public office, you are precluded from taking a job in that field. That would change the people that went into the field.
Or
into public office.
Public-funded public office. Like, nobody takes any money. We flip, it's a jury duty. It's you this year.
Well, I don't know. I kind of do have rent and food to buy. I mean,
No. We pay for you, but you don't take outside money. There's no outside.
oh, you're saying
finance.
public finance
Remember that-
campaigns.
That thing, yeah.
Yes, I
That's kind
absolutely
of a good
believe in
idea.
public financing
Should
of
be
campaigns.
transparent.
Because then
But
you're
still-
only beholden to the voters, not to the donors.
But still, though, public finance campaign, you're in office.
Okay,
You didn't take outside money.
yeah.
Netra, if you do a good job that favors my industry, when you leave, I got all this money for you. How do you control that?
Oh, you're saying
Great
that
jobs after you leave, yeah.
and then it's afterwards, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
then I'm
Yeah.
not in office. I don't plan on going office again, and it's harder to control.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe
We need law. I mean, that's
maybe we
the
need
level.
a revolving door policy
Yeah,
that I'm
because-
precluded, and if I do, I could be arrested.
Yeah, because the rules we have now, even if we had transparency, and you got to declare all your donors.
Yes,
It's
true.
like false sense of security. The big money is jobs after they leave office. I mean,
Exactly.
it's like a token law here.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, just look.
Yeah, it's true. And I know that's
Okay.
happening in Wall Street quite a bit. And in
Well-
Monsanto, isn't Vilsack,
Yeah.
who's now the Secretary of Agriculture,
And they
isn't
got
he
a
a big
guy-
Monsanto guy?
And no, I'm not sure about him, but they got a guy in the FDA.
Okay, so I guess that was you talking, so I don't know if you have comment on yourself.
No, I still feel the same way, but if Monsanto were here to comment on our clips, because they've commented on my statements before, you're very naive, Dr. Pang. There's conflict of interest everywhere. I know there is. I just want to see how much of it.
Right.
And when we worked for the World Health Organization and we reviewed drugs, of course the drug maker comes in and gives their statement, but everybody knows it's the drug maker with a conflict of interest, and so everybody kind of takes that with a grain of salt. And they sure don't get to vote, and they sure don't get to have secret conferences with the members outside of the hearing.
Right. And I think it's the money. The money is the big thing.
It's the money.
When candidates need money to run. You need advertising money, and then if you need money from the people that you're supposed to be regulating, that's a major conflict of interest. Like you said, they could come in. The anti-GMO person comes in, the pro-GMO person comes in. I listen to both arguments and I decide. But when there's money that's involved, that's when it gets skewed.
Now, it's not just candidates, politics. It's the regulators, too.
That's true, because they've been
Look at the
elected.
regulatory, MMA,
Yeah.
Mines and Mineral Administration, BP.
Right.
They were literally sleeping in bed with BP,
Oh,
when
God.
the thing went wrong. And
Yeah.
they could not judge the efficacy of that shut-off valve. I mean,
Right.
it was horrible,
Yeah.
but they swept that under the rug. It's the regulators that
Yeah.
are conflicted, too.
And I think one of the most we have the biggest issues is the FDA. You have
Yeah.
revolving doors of
Yep.
Monsanto, ex-Monsanto people. I think in the judicial courts, Judge Thomas is a former Monsanto lawyer, right? I
Yeah.
believe, right?
Yeah.
Now, you get two options around conflict of interest: transparency or show me the data. That's why when they quote at the FDA apparently has an opinion of equivalence, that GM food is just like non-GM food. Sorry, but I have never, when I was with the FDA, not with them, but working together with them, trying to tell the rest of the world they had good principles, we go on data. We don't go on opinion.
Right.
When the FDA just goes on opinion, that's an insult to everybody who slaved away and built the reputation of the FDA, including me. I sold their principles to the rest of the world, and now they go on opinion with no data, because there's a guy from Monsanto, Taylor, there, who's a lawyer.
Okay, so let's do the third clip. Well, they talked about labeling already, so let's do number 4, Kihei operations.
A lot of our protesters have the GMO signs out here. Are you guys actually doing any kind of genetic experiments or anything in here, or?
We don't do necessarily, what I would classify as genetic experiments.
Yeah.
What we're doing is developing through traditional plant breeding methods characteristics in plants that allow them to grow without weed pressure and without a great deal of insect pressure.
Yeah.
So the seeds that we're producing here, the actual process that we use is traditional plant breeding. We take pollen from one corn plant, we cross it onto another corn plant.
So crossbreeding?
So basically it's plant breeding that we're doing, correct, Steve?
Okay.
And so we're not doing what I would call sort of the lab work associated with biotechnology.
Yeah.
We're doing traditional plant breeding. If you look at it from the standpoint of farming, we're basically farming. We're growing a plant, taking pollen from one plant, crossing it onto another, and doing plant breeding in the traditional sense.
So what are you guys going to be growing out here? Mainly corn or other crops?
Primarily
too?
corn. We do practice what's called a green manure crop, where we utilize one crop to basically till back into the soil. Stephen, if you understand tropical soils, they tend to weather organic matter quite quickly, and organic matter breaks down rather quickly. And so what we try to do is put organic matter back in the soil via a green manure crop. Sometimes it's soybeans, sometimes it's oats, sometimes it's wheat. And we just plow that back into the soil, adding organic matter, and then plant the next crop. And that does two things. It adds back organic matter, but it also conserves the soil. Working around here, occasionally we get a rainstorm, and it's nice to have that organic matter there because it keeps the soil in place and keeps it off of the reef.
Cool.
Okay, so what is your comment to that?
Well, first of all, you have these genetically modified plants with live mutations, DNA, functional mutations, and you're kind of plowing it back in. Actually, there's a lot shown that these mutations have what they call horizontal gene transfer. They can readily move or more easily move across to other organisms, microbes, other plants. And so, to say that, well, we're just kind of putting it back into organism, into the earth here, and all the microbes are exposed. I think we should be a little more cautious about that. Horizontal gene transfer has been shown to occur in the laboratory, and now you're putting it back into and hoping that it doesn't occur. I'd like to see a little precaution before we do that, number one. Number two, never mind the mutations. If your product has BT, the insecticide, made by the mutation, you are putting BT huge levels, and I thought there was an agreement that you were trying to decrease the amount of pesticides into our environment. But intrinsic to the plant, every cell has produced BT, and now you're kind of putting it back in. I mean, it's a nice theory to recycle, but you better be very careful about what's going back.
Yeah. Okay, so then let's look at labeling, number 3, labeling, because I've had a request here because I know you gentlemen want to respond directly to labeling.
In the United States, there's an organization called the United States Department of Agriculture. And within the USDA, there's a national organic program. And if an individual goes through the certified organic program within the USDA, by definition, they cannot use certain products of GMO or biotech origin. So if a USDA certified organic label appears, a consumer who chooses to have biotech free can certainly have that choice. Other food manufacturers also freely label non-GMO. For instance, I shop at Foodland and Safeway, and occasionally Costco. And there's a, I think it's called, I don't want to get the name wrong. It's a fruit smoothie. I think it's Botello. It's apple, banana, and they have right on their label non-GMO. So from a food choice standpoint, a consumer who wants to buy USDA organic or who wants to buy a label that's a product that certainly is labeled non-GMO can do that.
Okay, so what is your response to that?
First of all, let me give you a little background about labeling. We assume there's truth in labeling, so let's suppose that you label what's truly there. When they tried that for the milk in Maine, the people who wanted to label their product as RBGH free, they were sued by Monsanto and the FDA, and they lost the suit. So having lost the suit, it's kind of odd that Monsanto says, oh, we were behind this all the time. You sued and lost, and now you have a fallback position that maybe you're for it all the time. Then we have a little trouble with truth in labeling. Organic was for being contaminated at higher and higher levels, and if you say, no, we label based on intention, not what's there, then there's no longer truth in labeling. How would you like me to make drugs or vaccines and have it contaminated, but I get to label it as what I intended to make, not what it's really there? So now we have another issue is whether or not it's true. Nonetheless, the intention is there if you can make sure that it's true.
Just because there's organic labeling available doesn't mean our fundamental right to know what's in our food all of a sudden disappears.
Right.
Especially given the fact that these products are untested and potentially dangerous.
Right.
People want to know. American citizens who've been polled by NBC, ABC, Washington Post, overwhelmingly 90% wants labeling.
Yeah.
The rest of the world has it. The European Union, Korea, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and so on and so forth have mandated labeling. And so why don't we have it? And I think one of the important points about labeling is that cost. Companies, industries will complain about, oh, it's going to be so costly.
Why? They're already putting labels anyway. What's a couple more words?
Exactly. In independent study, it's shown about $5 to a person annually, whereas industry-backed studies have shown over $100. And this is a consistent behavior by industries when they're trying to fight back tighter regulations or things like labeling.
I mean, because they have the words there anyway, so to just put 2 more words, I mean, they go to their computer program and they just change the words. I don't really see the big expense there. It takes 5 minutes.
Well, they would say things like they need to change the infrastructure because they need GMO labeling or GMO infrastructure versus non-GMO infrastructure. But a lot of it's already in place because they're shipping food to Europe or Japan, so on and so forth. So a lot of the infrastructure is in place already to do that.
What do you mean by infrastructure?
Oh, logistics.
Oh, we're talking about labeling. You're talking about shipping at different places. I'm not sure I'm confused.
Well, if you have a GMO food,
yeah,
right, then logistically, they need to be separated from non-GMO food. So they're complaining about how expensive it's going to be, blah, 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 blah. But again, independent study have shown it's not going to cost very much.
Right.
And I would add that anecdotally, in countries that have implemented GMO labeling, like the UK, there's been no documented study. And at the retail level, the supermarket managers have, after the GMOs were adopted, they saw no price increases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, there's a bill going through Hawaii. Each county is trying to pass the labeling bill. GMO food is labeled, whether or not we produce it here, and it passed in Maui. So it's kind of like Yo said, this is our fallback position. If you told me there's an untested drug that happens to be shown to have harm in animals, that drug doesn't reach the market, labeled or not.
Right.
So my official position is don't let that reach the market. But if it's going to reach the market, go ahead and label it.
Right.
But let's have some truth in it, what's really there, not what you intended to put there.
Right. Okay, so let's see the video number 5, worldwide operations. And then you can make your responses about worldwide.
From a standpoint of worldwide adoption, I've already mentioned that around the world, close to, I think the number now is close to 600 to 700 million acres of biotech crops are planted around the world. And it's not just in the United States. The United States actually makes up less than half of that total. And if you look at the number of farmers that are planting it, close to 90% of the 15+ million farmers are in small developing countries who are planting biotech. So from the standpoint of worldwide adoption, it's planted very prevalently around the world.
Okay, so what is your response to that?
Well, the biotech industries like to throw out those numbers. They talk about, so it sounds like there's a worldwide adoption, but if you look at the number of countries and in comparison to acreage, U.S., Brazil, Argentina make up 80% of the acreage plotted.
Right.
And then you add 3 more countries, China, India, and Canada, and that's 95%
Right.
of GMO plotted land.
Right.
And then he's talking about the small-scale farmers, about 13 million. Well, there's 513 million small farmers out there. So in contrast to what they're saying, it's really the minority in terms of countries, number of countries,
Right.
and some farmers that are adopted GMOs.
Okay.
Plus, from a health point of view, my argument's real easy. Just think about smoking.
Right.
Before, well, even after we saw it cause cancer, to give the argument that, oh, so many people smoke, so I guess it's okay. Oh, so many people were growing tobacco to smoke, so does that make it okay? So many people were using lead and asbestos before we found out it was dangerous. Does that make it okay? That's
Right.
that's like the strangest argument to me at all, of all. Now, when too many people smoked, it just meant we got a big problem.
Right.
So when a lot of people do this and the safety hasn't been shown, it means you're asking for a potentially huge problem, especially when it's a life form that cannot be recalled, like
Right.
GM papaya
Right.
in the Big Island. We did a survey how much stuff is out there that was never intended to be GMO, 50%.
Wow.
So smoking, lead, asbestos, we can stop it. DDT, we can stop it. But this you can't stop. And so just because a lot of people do it for whatever reason, however you want to skew the data, it doesn't make it okay.
And I just want to remind people, this is a call-in show. If you want to call in and ask a question of Dr. Pang or Yo Kobayashi, our number is 873-3430. So 873-3430. So please call in if you want to ask a question or make a comment.
Look, there was a clip that wasn't shown at the very beginning because we had technical trouble.
Right.
You and I know this very well because we give testimony. And they make a statement that our intention here is to save the world. We're having a crisis of hunger, and we just wanted to save the world. Now, I could talk about that. Well, I made drugs and vaccines to help people. Of course I studied them, and we pulled back a lot of them because the side effects outweigh the risk.
Right.
Even if that was their intention, just to say, well, because of good intentions, we get to move forward unchecked.
Right.
Now, I want Yo to comment a little bit about this save the world intention.
Certainly. The world's poor, which is about 2.1 billion people who live on less than $2 a day. Their problems are things like access to capital, which is money,
Right.
poor public infrastructure,
Right.
poor health,
Right.
soil, water.
And why do they have poor health?
They don't have access to food, good
Yeah.
food. They don't have knowledge of sound, sustainable farming techniques.
Right.
And one of the big problems is globalization, which has opened them up to competition from the large agribusinesses.
Okay.
Many of them are using GM crop.
Yeah.
They've benefited largely, the big-time, large-scale farmers, and the sharp price volatilities. And GM doesn't address any of these fundamental issues of the poor, so much so that there was a 2008 study that came out. It took 4 years to complete, $10 million by 400 researchers.
Yeah.
It was put together by the UN,
Yeah.
WHO,
Okay.
the World Bank, UNESCO, and a consortium of companies. And they
Yeah.
concluded that GMOs do nothing to help the poor.
Okay.
And if you look at what's actually happening in countries that have adopted GM, South America, what's happening is, and this is where Monsanto does $2 billion of sales every year. The large agribusinesses have done really well.
Okay.
And the small-scale farmers have lost land, and a lot of the farmers have lost jobs. And to the point where in South America, GM-related socioeconomic problem is a hot topic.
Right.
You might say, or they might say, well, give us time. We just got started. It's only been 10 years. We are about to change all that. Actually, if you look, things are going backwards. The
Things are
super
getting
weeds
worse.
and the pesticides and the increased cost of pesticides to control it, it ain't getting better. And the USDA hasn't reported the last 7 or 8 years the increased cost of pesticides against superweed.
Right.
From a medical point of view, when you face a crisis, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it really is a shortage of food. I doubt it, but suppose it was. When you face a crisis and you bring out an unknown product, I'm sorry, but you need written informed consent of those exposed.
Of each individual.
There's an ethical committee that should have required this. When we have a flu attack, remember that in swine flu, and we didn't have a chance to fully test the vaccine, those people got written informed consent.
Right.
Now you have a crisis. You say you're moving out something unknown to save the world. And there's been accusations, you gave me the documents, that they piggyback it on this crisis so they can circumvent all the safety things.
Right.
One thing you do not circumvent is informed written consent.
Exactly.
Okay, from all those exposed, it's a life form, you
Right.
get the entire village or however widely it spreads.
Explained, because
Yes.
those people
Oh,
might not speak
informed consent.
English, etc.
Yes, we do this for our live vaccines in Bangladesh, and they double check. And live vaccine, it spreads beyond the kid you vaccinated.
Right.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
We had good intentions, but we got written informed consent. Something live in a crisis, something not fully tested.
Exactly. And then one more thing, also the economic thing of farmers not being able to be a small farm in themselves, but having to go become an employee. And I think most people everywhere around the world would rather have their own farm
Right.
than to become an employee of a large farm.
And that's exactly one of the things that UN says in the report is that these small farmers need to be able to farm on their own and their
Yeah.
small lots.
Yeah.
And GMO farming, what it actually does is it allows for usage of less labor. So that's exactly what's happening in South America, is they can farm now bigger plots with less people. That's another reason why these people are getting kicked off their land. They don't need them anymore,
Right.
which is a serious problem.
Yeah, exactly. So we do have a caller. So who is the caller?
My name is Loretta.
Hi, Loretta.
I want to just thank all three of you. Oh, God bless all of you for just doing such a wonderful job and really telling the truth. And I want to bring up something about pesticides. I've driven by at different times while they're going along the road, and I've gotten really sick where I had to come home. And they try to say that they don't do it only if it's not windy. I saw them do it one day by Hukipa. It was 30 miles an hour. The other thing I want to say is Monsanto has not gotten anybody's informed consent. They've never asked us anything, and that's our right. That's a law, and they're not following it. And I just thank you so much for having this program, and I hope you do more because more people need to get informed.
Thank you, Loretta, for calling. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Let me answer the second part first.
Okay.
Monsanto, you say they haven't gotten informed consent. It's not them, it's the regulators who regulate them. You remember there's conflict of interest?
Okay.
Who is regulating them? That's number one. Number two, I asked them, hey, how come you didn't get informed consent? Because the seed bag that they put it in says not for human consumption. Wait, that's odd. You didn't intend for us to be exposed. We were exposed, so therefore you need now informed consent. But the companies, I've seen this with drug companies, they get away with what they get away with. And I'll repeat that. You can sue me if you want, but these companies get away with what they get away with. That's why we have the regulators. You ask the regulators, where is their informed consent? And if the regulators are in cahoots because conflict of interest, like it's been well shown, published in New England Journal of Medicine, then we're lost.
Yeah.
And now we appeal to the public. I've never appealed to the public before for regulation of vaccines and drugs. We could barely pronounce the names. Now you have to, because the regulators are asleep at the wheel. Now the first part, spraying in the wind and all that, there's a suit on Kauai because of the pesticides associated with GM crops. They have to go multiple. Now, it's not just the single one, but the combinations have never been studied. The wind blows every other direction every 10 minutes, and they are not to be spraying this for single pesticides, let alone combinations. ATSDR, Agency for Toxic Substance Disease Registry, from the CDC. There's a statement in there 6 months ago. We have studied pretty well single pesticides, but we need to and have not studied combinations.
Right.
Those combinations are like new products with unknown levels of thresholds, health thresholds.
And it's also cumulative, that
Yes.
even if you don't do that deadly cocktail,
Yes.
like you spoke about, it's just like, okay, well, this one's only a certain amount. The fact is more people are getting cancer. That's just a fact.
Like in our water, you might have spread, H. Poco well has a combination. You sprayed them one at a time, didn't you? Yeah, but they're sitting in the water together.
Right.
Or cumulative on the effects of the body. You sprayed them one at a time, but they all affected and had residual effect on your
Exactly.
liver.
Yeah.
These guys haven't a clue what they're dealing with. We've seen it before in drugs. Combinations are considered new products to proven otherwise.
Right.
And I'd like to just add one point that, contrary to what the biotech industry is saying, pesticide and herbicide is up because of GMOs.
Right,
Oh,
that's
yes.
true. That's what he said in
Combinations,
the
too.
first one, is that because of GMOs, they're using less pounds of herbicides and pesticides. You're saying that is not, in fact, true.
They're using a whole lot more things to kill the plants. And I keep reading this because I can't believe it. Things that you make chemicals to kill plants, they certainly have an effect on the human body. Agent Orange, that was to kill the plants and causing cancers.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So you lump them all together, and when they're in mixtures, all bets are off.
Actually, we didn't talk about that. Agent Orange and the beginnings of Monsanto, how Monsanto started out. Does either of you want to give a brief synopsis?
Well, they were the ones who made Agent Orange, to the herbicide used during the Vietnamese War. But Agent Orange itself was toxic, but the contamination of it, the dioxin part, there was a contaminant in there which was even more toxic. And a lot of people claim that was their origins, well, not origins, but that was the source of their money. They're a chemical manufacturer, a chemical. Mm-hmm. And now that they've messed with genetics of plants, they still haven't tested the toxicity. And that's why Agent Orange was out, and it was causing so much toxicity, so many deaths. Released before fully tested, released before fully understood, but it wasn't live, so you can please stop it. This GMO stuff is alive.
Right.
It's something else. It's something altogether different.
And what would you say to, I'm sure you've probably testified at county council, and I haven't talked to actually our council members about this, but I'm assuming that council members and legislators, et cetera, are thinking of the dollars, all the money.
Jobs.
The
Same thing,
jobs is how they put it.
Yeah.
What do you say to that? Or you could, or both of you maybe.
Well, I'll tell you what Walter Riddy says. He's an activist of Molokai. If it's a question of money, then it's prostitution. We go to the highest bidder. You pay us enough, we do it. Now, we used to send our toxic waste, I think, to Nigeria. You pay somebody enough, they'll take it. That's unethical. The regulators should be involved in this. I don't expect industry to clean themselves up. They never have. The regulators are where it lies.
Exactly. And the regulators, the bosses of all the regulators are ultimately politicians, and the politicians are being paid off. I mean, it comes back the same, no matter what issue I look at, whether it's medical or educational or agricultural, it all comes back to this corrupt campaign financing system that we talked about.
Even this, Department of Health, in some sense, is a regulator, right?
Yeah, that's your job.
I have to speak as a private citizen. If you don't like what I say, challenge me on the facts. But now I speak as a private citizen because I've been regulated not to say this in my job, and I can't do it as my job. But look, pretend this is 1940s, and I was speaking about smoking.
Right.
Those guys were regulated. You can't do that part of your job. Now if you did, and they look back and say, oh, here's a guy who spoke. You're a hero. I don't like this double standard here that in hindsight we said those guys had guts. They spoke against smoking. Those guys spoke the facts, and you regulated them from speaking about it until the 50s when it was blown open. If I just try to tell the facts, I don't think I should be regulated. I'm sorry.
You mean you should be able to speak in your professional capacity because that is your job as the public health officer to make sure that we, the people of Maui, have public health, and the fact that you're not allowed to. Now, the fact that you are allowed to and the fact that they're not firing you is good. So that's one step, that they're not firing you. But it'd be even better if they just said, and please go speak as your official capacity, because that is, in fact, your job.
Well, if they ask, well, I asked them, how come I can't speak? And they said, well, that's not our official position. Fine, then let's have a little debate on what the facts are.
Okay?
Now, if you're not going to allow facts to be discussed here, and you call yourself regulators or educators, I'm sorry, but you know, I've worked at higher levels than, I worked at the international levels, and we work with the facts.
And what did they say at the Department of Health when you said, let's have a debate then to look at what our official position should be?
They said, you speak as a private citizen, we told you.
So in other words, they didn't.
That was a former,
so in other
the
words,
former one under Linda
right.
Lingles. No.
So the previous one, not this one, did not really want to discuss the facts.
Correct. And their position was no harm has been shown, which is ambiguous. It either means you've studied it and shown no harm, or you haven't studied it and no harm has been seen because you didn't study it. It was the latter, wasn't it?
Right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Just sort of going back to the jobs.
Yeah, the jobs thing.
Discussion. I think that's a very short-sighted view of things. Given all these facts about animal tests, all these people that don't want GMO, Hawaii's main business is tourism.
Right.
And so there's a lot of people who, if they found out there was so much GMO on Hawaii, I think their views of Hawaii would change.
Right.
So I think it's really important to focus on what is really key for Hawaii. And GMO agriculture is, it's a decent size in terms of other agriculture here, but in comparison to other businesses, it's minuscule. It's tiny.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
tiny.
Yeah. I mean, there's many things like ugly power poles or cane burning. There's a lot of issues that actually negatively impact tourism. And, you know, tourism still is our #1 industry. And why not have quality of life too?
Right.
Or if you're going to ask tourists to eat local, and they do want to eat local, and it's contaminated, well, now we have a little problem.
Right.
Now the tourists always weigh the weather and, you know, everything good against things are bad, and so far the things good outweigh it. But don't get to the tipping point where there's so many bad things they don't want to come anymore.
Yeah. And somebody could say, why are we having this show on television and, you know, tourists could watch? Well, we're alerting. We're saying, okay, let's together make a decision that our goal is to have a healthy, I mean, this is called the health state. People call Hawaii the health state. So let's truly live up to that. Let's be honest and truly live up to that and put quality of life over a quick buck.
Any callers?
Any callers? No more callers? Okay, we do have a caller. Go ahead, caller.
Hi, my name's Jen, and I wanted to thank both of the speakers who are here today very much for being here. And my question's for Dr. Pang. And my question's regarding the health trials. And have they tested GMOs on humans for longer than 30 days, 90 days? What have they done to say it's safe? Because my impression is that they actually haven't done almost any human testing, so to claim it's safe for humans seems inaccurate at best.
Yes, that's correct. We've repeatedly asked for the data when they claim it's been tested on humans, and it's very minimal. I think there's a handful of humans. They gave some GM food to somebody, and they looked at his microbes, and actually they showed the microbes in his gut. We have a lot of microbes. It's a part of our normal flora. It's important that the microbes picked up the genes. It's like 7 people, but even small as the number was, it was a little bit alarming that the genes had transferred into the microbes of the gut. That is down below where the acid of the stomach was supposed to kill at. That's all I know of. And no matter how much stack of papers they ask you to read, if you actually look for these kind of studies that we look for in drugs and vaccines, they just aren't there. But the animal data is piling up. And the animal data is very worrisome. But the industry will tell you animals are animals and men are men. That's a little disturbing, that point of view. Because the animals indicate what you're supposed to look at in men.
Right.
Okay. Now, in human cells outside the body, they've actually cultured human cells in test tubes, and they've shown that GM food stuff, the mutations go into the human cells, and they're on not years and years of testing, but just that kind of exposure that they will transfer. So we don't even know human studies, let alone short-term, subacute, which is 6 months, or chronic. And I wouldn't mind so much, except it's a life form that once you see something, it's a little bit too late to recall.
All right. Thank you for your answer, Dr. Pang.
Thanks for calling, Jen. Let's just say in your position as a public health officer, your boss said, okay, Dr. Pang, we respect your opinion. What would you like us to do? What would you do?
Really?
All this power, here you go.
We're a regulator.
Okay.
And a lot of people will turf it to say, well, we're a regulator at state level, but the FDA is the regulator, FDA,
Okay.
Federal Food and Drug Administration. Well, guys, I mean, you can't keep pointing to the other guy to regulate.
Right.
We're the regulator.
Okay.
If you have the authority, you have the responsibility.
Okay.
So if something did go wrong and you had the authority to do something about it, then you're to blame. And, I take that seriously. Smoking, go read our laws. Our laws state we have the right to suspend, modify, change any rule, including federal rules. We can preempt when harm is being done, except for smoking.
Right.
So, hey, we're off the hook. Don't blame us.
So what would you do in this particular situation? You now have the power that you should have. What would you do regarding Monsanto right now?
I would review them. I would suspend further use of it. This is exactly the position of American Academy of Environmental Medicine, 300 MDs, PhDs. We are to put a moratorium on new products, label the old ones. I mean, it's nice to remove the old ones, but if you can't, at least label them, and moratorium on the new ones till independent research has been done to show it. I side with that body, and that is what the regulators should be doing. I don't care if it's state, county, or federal. Right. Somebody's got to step up to the plate.
Right.
Now, they supported us when we did the taro ban. They wrote a letter
good.
to say this is exactly how we want our position interpreted in terms of laws or litigation. We can win in court.
Right.
Because all the facts come out. So that is what should be done.
And what would you do if you were given, on the business side, on the economic side, what would you do if you were in charge?
Well, it would have to be start from the regulators, the same thing.
Okay.
So it would be essentially the same thing. It would just trickle down to the business aspects of it.
Yeah. Right. And what would you do when they said, oh, what about all those people that work there? What would you do? Would you have an alternate?
Absolutely. And these are really smart people. And one of the things is that with the GM industry, it's not a very big industry. It's not like the automotive industry where it's humongous. If you shut that down, it'd be disastrous. But this is a relatively smaller industry, so people could shift.
Okay, so thank you. We're going to wrap up the show today. Thank you for coming. It's been very educational, and I hope to see you again soon. So goodbye. Thanks for tuning into Netra's News. We'll see you in a couple weeks.